Hey, great to have you here. So here today, we're going to break down episode 3 of Dexter Original Sin, and appreciate the comments we've gotten on episode 2. So episode 2 and 3 actually got released on the same day because they're going to do a gap week sometime later in the season, I think in January at some point. So 2 episodes for this week, so a lot of Dexter for this week, essentially. And before jumping into episode 3, I do want to highlight, someone made the point in the comments in episode 2, I forgot to mention in that review that when Dexter sees that person in the restaurant and they ask for the seat, that person very much could be Brian Moser. He definitely looked a lot like him. I remember watching the episode thinking, hey, that's Brian, but they never actually directly say it's Brian. I don't know if the reason for that is because Dexter didn't know Brian, so if he acknowledged it, then it would be very obvious at that point in time. Either way, there was a subtle hint at Brian being involved in Dexter's life and seeking him out a little bit prior to actually seeing him. Who knows if that actually winds up being Brian or not, but there was at least an intentional look-like if it wasn't Brian. The cool point there with episode 2. Jumping into episode 3, giving a high-level overview of my thoughts on that one. So as far as characters, similar to episode 2, I feel like Dexter really shined in episode 3. Definitely felt like he was coming into his own there, being a little bit careless, but obviously it's early Dexter, so it makes a lot of sense for his character. Strong performance by Patrick Gibson as Dexter here. Batista, I thought, was a little bit better overall when compared to episode 2. Felt like a little bit more of himself. Granted, he wasn't in the episode as much as episode 2. I thought the captain particularly shined, especially at the beginning of the episode when he gave his dramatic speech. Deb, overall, I thought was fine. Harry, I thought was a little bit, he wasn't as great as prior episodes. I don't know what it was exactly, but it felt like his storyline and character I don't feel like as invested in. It doesn't feel like necessarily the Harry that we really know. And I know they're flushing him out quite a bit. It's seeming a little bit more and more that Dexter Original Sin's not just Dexter's story. And I kind of wanted this previously when I made a video giving my wish list, talking about getting more depth to some characters. So we're definitely getting that here with Harry, giving his backstory involvement with Laura Moser. But it feels like it takes us out of the story sometimes, and I'm not enjoying it necessarily as much as the main storyline. Although some of the tension with Laura is pretty good, but we kind of know where that winds up, so it's hard to make that super intense until we get to that final point ultimately. Tanya and Masuka I thought were okay overall, just their typical selves, so nothing really to point out there. And then on top of that, we have a new character inclusion here that we're familiar with, so I thought that person did extremely well, that I'll get more in detail in the spoiler section. As far as the overall plot here, we get the development of Dexter with having his first real hunt that he has and doing his research and his involvement as far as figuring out, hey, is this a bad person? Is this the right decision to make? So a lot of that here, still as I mentioned, a bit sloppy in how he goes about it, but that makes sense for his character at this point in time. We get, as I pointed out, a lot more Harry backstory here. Some of that's great, some of it's not as great. It just feels like it's dragging a little bit. It kind of feels like we're trying to flush out as much as we can with this storyline about him being involved with Laura Moser, and we know where that winds up going, so we're kind of just expanding it a lot here. Maybe trying to pitch them as being romantic slowly over time. Maybe that's the goal they're going with here, but it feels like we're definitely stretching this story quite a bit thin here, especially since we know what ultimately happens. As pointed out, we get a familiar face that joins this show in this episode, so great to have that. And then there weren't as many scenes, it felt like, in this episode involving the kidnapping storyline that we got in episode 2, so curious to see where that winds up going at this point. And then overall, I feel like things are finally progressing, storylines are moving along, but I'm not sure if I'm really interested in a lot of them at this point in time. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. Are some of these stories with, Harry's backstory with Laura, or Dexter learning how to kill ultimately and do his first hunt, are those things that are interesting for you to watch thus far? Or are they just kind of things that take place, you know what happens, and just seeing how it plays out doesn't necessarily draw a lot of intrigue for you? Because it feels like in some ways that's what's happening with me. I think I'm more interested in potentially the story about this kidnapped kid because it's something we don't know about yet. They need to probably involve more of that, in my opinion, as far as going down routes of stuff that we aren't familiar with. I get if it was a big story, we probably would have heard about it in the original Dexter series, but doing stuff that we haven't seen before and haven't heard about feels like it's a bigger draw for me personally. We know Dexter's backstory in the first episode. We know the whole Laura Moser thing. So a lot of this stuff, it's cool to see it actually take place, but that kind of wears off pretty quickly when you're like, okay, I need to be interested in this. I need to be on the edge of my seat, and I'm not really on the edge of my seat a whole lot when I know the inevitable path we're taking with a lot of these storylines. So in my opinion, they should probably invest a little bit more in the stuff that we aren't familiar with because that draws the intrigue ultimately. So overall, as far as giving this a rating, as far as positive, neutral, or negative, I don't want to sound like a broken record here, but I'm going to put this one at a neutral rating. It just feels like There's not anything they really flop with, but there's not anything that's like amazing that I want to watch the next episode immediately because of this. So feels like we're kind of still in that middle ground. If I was ranking the episodes thus far, as far as just doing it at this point in time, I'm probably saying 1, 3, 2. So I like this one potentially a little bit more than episode 2, but still not necessarily enough that makes this a really great standalone season. The inclusion of the previous storylines in the original Dexter series, it really what kind of carry the interest for this season thus far. I know some of that's going to take place, but they did heavily mention we're trying to grow the series, we're trying to grow the fan base with this show, with Dexter Original Sin, and I don't really see them doing that thus far. We still have some time to go here, so maybe we'll get there at some point, but it feels like for now the intrigue is primarily because I'm a Dexter fan overall. So then jumping into spoilers, just jumping into the detail of what happened in the episode, we have a really great opening, I'll say here, with Patrick Dempsey, or the captain, holding a press conference about the kidnapped kid. We have Harry checking in with Dexter saying, hey, are you still okay watching this? And then Dexter is separately with his team, and he says, hey, maybe something spring-loaded like pruning shears was needed to cut the child's finger off. And then you have Masuka put his knucks out to Dexter, and Dexter high-fives it. So once again, showing Dexter not necessarily one of the guys at this point in time. He's still very much an outsider as far as being familiar with normal human behaviors, but funny interaction with him and Masuka there. Then we cut back to Dempsey, and Dempsey has a great finish to his speech. He says something like, if you do not release him, you will pay the ultimate price. And he's very serious and very intimidating there, so I'm not sure it's really going to be effective as far as the message to the kidnapper, but it feels like as far as an opening scene, it's really effective for the audience at least. Then we cut to Deb, who's at school, and she's there with like her friend group. She has somewhat of these cliques in her friend group that are playing volleyball. There's like this other popular girl who she's trying to kind of compete against. One of the friends winds up saying the scouts from Florida State are there, and Deb says she needs to make captain on the volleyball team in order to impress them. And then you have the other girl, as I mentioned, Tiff, I think is her name, Tiffany. She winds up being extremely rude to Deb, not allowing her to sit with the main group. So Deb and her main friend from the prior episodes are kind of isolated. She overhears the other girls talking, and Deb speaks out and says, hey, I can get Coke for you guys. Come to my house for an evening for a party. So she's trying to be cool and popular so that she gets voted captain is essentially her goal there. Then we cut to Miami Metro and watching the kid on the news once again. And lo and behold, LaGuerta shows up here and sees Dexter. Dexter's super awkward in greeting her. And out of nowhere slides in Batista, trying to be super suave and flirt with her. And she shuts that down right away. She's like all about business. And Batista's like, oh, okay, whoa. I was trying to be interested in you. You mean, didn't realize she was just focused on her job and she's there to do her work ultimately. Then we have Patrick Dempsey come out, the captain, and he reads this quote from Miami Herald. He definitely does not like LaGuerta. The quote involves something along the lines of ripping on Miami Metro. She was very publicly against the performance of Miami Metro, and Patrick Dempsey clearly does not like her. He winds up giving her like some lame paperwork to do and says, hey, Maria, go do this. And she says, it's detective. So there's definitely a feud there that's already taken place. We know Maria's kind of tactics as far as trying to go up the chain as far as her career goes. So that's kind of starting off here in the first time we see Maria in the show. Then we have Harry going to the captain's office, and the captain says, hey, keep an eye on Maria. It sounds like he was forced to hire Maria, so doing definitely the politics as far as positioning yourself and advancing your careers within Miami Metro. Then we cut to Dexter hunting Ferrer, the guy that was mentioned in the previous episode that ultimately killed the mother of Renee and led to Renee taking his own life. And during that hunt, we get the iconic, suspenseful scene sound. I tried to find this online. The best I could find was, I'm going to put it right here. But yeah, you kind of know that noise that Dexter, when it's really suspenseful noise. They throw that in this episode quite a few times. I don't feel like they did it appropriately, though. It's like randomly thrown in there. I'm like, the scene wasn't suspenseful. I don't know why that noise happened, but they have that here, and it's very noticeable as far as introducing that once again with the series. And then we have Dexter break into Ferrer's house. He's doing his research as far as trying to figure out, is this guy killer? Does he meet the code? It's a pretty nice place. I was a little surprised that this criminal would have this clean of a place ultimately. He has like a calendar with all of his plans, and Dexter sees that, opens the fridge, tons of stuff in there, and Dexter like eats from his fridge. And I'm thinking, would a criminal have a calendar on their fridge? I don't know if that kind of stuff would take place, but either way, we're building suspense with a voice is elsewhere in the house, and Dexter's kind of creeping around. He realizes, oh, it's just a parrot that's repeating the words from the criminal earlier. Dexter finds the killer's record book on who's owed him money, and we see a list of names, and some of them are crossed out. So Dexter gets his camera, takes like a Polaroid picture of the pages to confirm, hey, maybe these names that are crossed out are people that were killed ultimately. So he cuts back to the office where he confirms the deaths of those people that were crossed out. So at this point, he knows, hey, these people owed money, they couldn't pay, so Ferrer killed them. And at this point, he's like, okay, he meets the code, we're all good to go. He leans over to Masuka and asks, hey, Masuka, can you make me a fake ID? I don't know how out of nowhere Masuka just has this ability. He's like, oh yeah, I definitely do that. So he makes it for Dexter right there and invites Dexter like a party later, and it's like super inappropriate. And Tiny's like, hey, Masuka, chill. And the name for Dexter is Patrick, and he's a 24-year-old. So kind of funny. Patrick is the actual actor's name, Patrick Gibson, although we find out it's a different last name later on, which is another nod entirely. And then we cut to the Morgan home where Dexter's making breakfast for dinner. Deb comes home with her friend, and Dexter notices the earrings that are being worn by Deb's friend that he took off of Nurse Mary, and he's freaking out. He runs to his VHS box and realizes they're gone. Barges in on Deb when she's in the room, and he asks her, hey, get these earrings back for me. She says, all right, I'll do that, but you need to get coke for our party. So she's trying to get drugs for her party and trying to say, hey, if you do that, I'll help you get the earrings back. Then at dinner, we have Dexter staring at the friend with the earrings on. He's just like straight staring at her, and Harry's noticing it, and she's noticing it. She thinks he's into her, so definitely mixed messages going on here. And then Deb asks Harry, hey, can I have friends come over this weekend and just hang out and just chill? Super low-key stuff. And Harry's like, yeah, definitely. Obviously, we know it's going to wind up being a big party. We then cut to outside later where Harry asks Dexter about Deb's friends. Like, hey, it seems like you guys were kind of into each other. And Dexter, at this point, confesses, hey, she's wearing the earrings that Nurse Mary had, so that's kind of a big deal for me. And Harry's, like, freaking out. I'm surprised Dexter told him this at this point, but he mentions the code, like, number 1, don't get caught. And you're keeping trophies. Trophies are what killers do. You're not that kind of person, Dexter. You're different. So he's doing a little bit of scolding of Dexter here. Dexter mentions, hey, keeping the earrings kept the urges at bay so he could, like, remember them. And then Harry makes the point, hey, you're no different than the bad people if you do stuff like that. He urges Dexter to get the earrings back and ultimately get rid of them. When walking away, Dexter mentions to Harry, hey, I want to go out tonight. I want to go to High Ally, I think that's what it's called. Harry's like, sure, I guess you can try to be social, but you don't even watch football with me, so I don't know why you want to do that. So then we cut to a flashback of Harry in a motel with Laura Moser, and she's getting dressed up all fancy to get cash for drugs. The goal is to get cash from these people and then have the police mark the cash and then put the cash back into the flow of the drug dealers so that they can catch Estrada, the main bad guy ultimately that we are well familiar with if you watch the original Dexter series. I wasn't sure exactly how they were going to get the money back to the criminals, but we wind up seeing that a little bit later on. Then we cut to Dexter at this event, and they're using like these scoopers to throw these balls at the wall. It's the High Ally, or however you pronounce it, that I mentioned earlier. And we have Dexter approach Ferrer, who's there, and they're doing typical small talk type stuff. He's going to wind up leaving, but Dexter says, wait. And he gives the name of Patrick, the fake ID that he wound up getting, and says, Jorge told me to come get a hookup from you. So he mentions another name that he saw in the book. And the guy winds up lending Dexter money with the intent of charging interest that he's going to get paid back on. So Dexter borrows money from this guy. Ferrer says, hey, Mr. Bateman. So we find out Dexter's fake ID name is Patrick Bateman, obviously a reference to American Psycho. Cool reference there. Then later on have Deb ask Dexter about the earrings and where he got them from. He then scrambles to make up a story about buying them for his mom for Mother's Day, and they're ultimately shopping for replacement earrings for her friend. So the goal is, hey, give her these new earrings, and she'll give up the old earrings. I don't know how that was supposed to be a foolproof plan instead of just Deb asking for the earrings back, but either way, they're going to buy new earrings. Dexter pays with like $100 that he got from Ferrer, and Deb's like, well, where'd you get that? He's like, hey, I'm a working man now. We then cut to LaGuerta talking to Harry, and Harry mentions, hey, it must be tough coming from narcotics as a woman. LaGuerta says something like, white people get preference for case solving, so a little bit of tension building there between the two of them. And then we get a quick flashback with Harry and Laura Moser. She's ultimately buying drugs, so that's how the money winds up getting back to Estrada as far as tracking that goes. Then we cut to Dexter, who's at a bar, and he's playing pool and losing money, and you see Ferrer there see that. And Dexter, it seemed like intentionally lost the pool game to lose money in front of Ferrer to get him a little bit riled up. So he takes him outside, and he shoots a gun right by Dexter's ear, similar to what happened with Renee and killing his mom. And I wondered at this moment, is Dexter intentionally positioning himself in front of this tree because he wants the bullet to be right there, that he can get it in the future? So yes, that winds up happening. Ferrer threatens him, says, all right, give me the money tomorrow. So Dexter gets the bullet out of the tree, studies it under the microscope. So here's where he confirms 100% that it matches the bullet that killed Renee's mom. So he's like testing the bullet. I assume he got from the evidence room or something with the bullet from the tree. Tanya actually approaches him and changes some of the settings on the microscope to help him out and winds up saying, yep, perfect match. Both bullets match. So we, at this point, 100% know this guy killed Renee's mom. She then mentions to Dexter, hey, WD-40 was found under the fingernail of the kid that went missing, whose finger was mailed to the judge. And that validates in her mind that a garden tool was used. So it sounds like she thinks Dexter was right as far as a pruning tool being used to cut the kid's finger off. Not sure what we really learned with that and how we know WD-40 definitely means garden tool, but that's the connection they make there, and feels like Dexter feels a little bit more validated, gets more positive recognition with his boss. Then we have Dexter print out the bullet image. At first I'm like, why are you doing that? But he brings that to Harry to confirm, hey, the code has been met, and he presents to him, this is clear evidence, this guy did this. Once again, I'm surprised Dexter is as open as he is with Harry, but it makes sense, kind of, they have a really good bond with each other. He shows him that the code's been met, this guy definitely deserves his table, and wants to get Harry's kind of approval to move forward with this plan. He emphasizes to Harry as well that working for Miami Metro is not enough. He definitely needs to do these acts on these villains. And Harry says, all right, run everything by me because it impacts the entire family. I get impacted, you get impacted, Deb gets impacted. So if we're going to move forward with this, you're going to check everything with me. Every small detail is going to be checked with me. Dexter says, all right, I'm good to go. I'm going to go kill Ferrer tonight. Harry says he's coming along. Dexter urges, no, this is a solo mission, and really gives the impression to Harry, you don't want to see the stuff that I'm doing. Harry finally says, okay. He just says, no trophies. So don't bring anything back at this point. Then we get another flashback of Harry putting a wire on Laura Moser. And it feels a little bit sleazy here. He really guilt trips Laura by emphasizing, hey, make Miami a better place for your boys if you go forward with this plan. So really guilting her into being his informant and doing these things that we know where it winds up. So there's definitely going to be guilt built up from this experience. Probably why Dexter winds up joining Harry in the future. After moving forward with it, Laura gets picked up by somebody in the car, which was not part of the plan. So Harry and his partner are following them, and the criminal's questioning Laura in the car. He's like, how did you get away, but your partner got arrested? And how'd you grow your clientele so largely? So she's getting really heckled by this guy. Harry's like, we need to go in and help her. And the partner urges, hey, she'll get it done. Don't worry about this. We then cut back to present time, or I guess original sin present time. Deb is prepping for the party with snacks, and the friend thanks Dexter for the drugs. Earlier on in the episode, Dexter and Deb were together, and Dexter's making fake Coke with various ingredients, things like caffeine powder and things along those lines. So he has these fake drugs that he's giving the kids that they're not going to really tell the difference as far as his opinion goes. He winds up giving her the earrings that he bought earlier in the show, and she immediately takes off her earrings and says, give these back to Deb. I don't know how that would have been the first impulse, but she puts the new earrings on, and the one she takes off, she's just like, give these to Deb. That felt a bit of a stretch. It feels like he should have had to work a little bit hard to get those ones back, whether it was her just setting him down and he grabs them, something like that, but she just gives him up right away. She also asks him, hey, how do I look? And Dexter, in typical awkward self, says, they look good. They're blue, green, turquoise? Because earlier they bought the earrings that were like her birthstone, but he had no idea what he bought. They were turquoise, essentially. And then all the girls show up, and they, of course, do their line of fake drugs, and Dexter smiles at Deb because it clearly worked out. The friend walks out with Dexter as he's leaving and kisses him, and he awkwardly gets out of it. He's like, hey, I need to go. And he shuts it down with a fist bump. So he learned from Masuka. He did the fist bump to her this time. So they both actually fist bump there, which is very awkward. He definitely wanted to be like, hey, we're friends here. This is definitely not something romantic. Then we cut to the kidnapped kid finally here. So first actual appearance of him once again from episode 2. We see the doors open. He's like walking through it. He gets grabbed by somebody and screams. So don't see what winds up happening to him. So imagine nothing good there. Then we cut back to Miami Metro. We have a witness talking to Maria instead of Harry because she's more relatable. We get another flashback of Harry in the motel freaking out. He's talking to somebody on the phone, and Laura Moser comes in, and she got a successful meeting plans. They're about to walk out, and Laura mentions to Harry, hey, my babysitter's with the boys for another hour, so do you want to hang out for a little bit? Definitely trying to get a little bit close to Harry, and Harry realizes, hey, I'm married, and he thinks like, hey, I think we should go. They wind up leaving that scene, delaying that inevitable romance between the two of them. And then we cut to Ferrer going home and seeing a bird on his table. So the parrot we saw earlier in the episode is loose on his table. Dexter attacks him from behind. Does a pretty poor job as far as taking him down originally. They brawl for a bit, but somehow Dexter winds up choking out Ferrer. I don't know where Dexter got this like martial arts skills. It feels like he's very interested in these killers, but somehow he has the abilities of a lot of them. I don't know where he gets this strength, but either way, he takes him down here. The bird says something like, honey, I'm home, just repeating what the guy said. Dexter kind of funnily opens the door and says, find yourself a new home, honey. So lets the bird loose. A little surprised with that, though. I thought he was going to kill the bird, which I didn't want to see, but it felt like that was extra evidence. So lets the bird loose, and as I mentioned, that feels like that's kind of evidence that's now out there in the world. We then cut to Dexter and Ferrer in that sports arena from earlier. Ferrer's all tied up. The only thing he's wearing, I think, is his fancy shoes. Then Dexter's like swinging the ball, throwing it at the wall near him. One of the throws gets really close to his face and slices his cheek, actually. Then we randomly cut to Ferrer, now being on a table on the ground instead of being vertical. He's horizontal at this point in time. And here's once again where they crank that Dexter noise that we're so used to at this point in time. The guy's pleading and a bunch of stuff, and Dexter, in his typical fashion, says, hey, I don't want money. Slashes at Ferrer. Blood goes everywhere. So definitely not a clean scene compared to the prior one or compared to what we're used to. He just slashes him and apparently just chops his head off right there. You see actually blood splatter on Dexter, even gets in his mouth, I feel like. Then we have Dexter, as he did with Nurse Mary, go to Alligator Alley, throw the body and the head into the swamp separately. throws the earrings in, so those are in the swamp as well. I don't know if that's really disposing them effectively, but they're thrown in the swamp, and there's still blood on his shirt, so he definitely has some evidence there. And then we see the hand of Ferrer float to the top of the water, so seems like that's going to come back to bite him in some capacity in the future. Then we close out the episode with Dexter at the restaurant from prior episodes, and he says in his head, "Debt paid," as he's looking at Renee's picture, implying he took out the trash, took out the killer that ultimately led to Renee's mom dying and led to Renee taking his own life. And then Deb shows up there and says, "Hey, I got you a hot girlfriend," things like that. He mentions, "Hey, you're super hungry," and Dexter's like, always hungry. He is eating a whole lot in this episode especially. I know he does that in the original show a little bit, but it feels like this episode, they really hammer home, hey, Dexter likes to eat a lot of food. That's how we close out. Dexter saying, always hungry, implying a lot of different meanings of that word there. That's the gist of episode 3. As mentioned in my recap from earlier, there's definitely a lot of storylines that are finally progressing, which is awesome to see. I'm not sure that some of them are ones that I'm overly interested by. It's cool to see Harry and Laura Moser's backstory because we just got flashbacks here and there. We didn't get the exact background between the two of them, but I'm not sure that's really intriguing enough for me personally. Some of the other areas like Dexter learning how to do his research and find out, hey, does this person meet the code? And then moving forward with that and ultimately putting them on his table. Feels like that was interesting to see him do that, but we've seen it before and there's not much new here. We're just kind of seeing him do it a little bit more sloppily. So I want to see more what happens with the kidnapped kid. I think that's the storyline for me personally that has me the most intrigued. Some of these other things that we're going through, I'm not sure there's a payoff that I overly feel interested in. So I'm really hoping they lean into that kidnapped killer sometime in the next couple episodes because that feels like that's where the intrigue is for me. That's where we don't know the outcome for that one. So it allows us to be a little bit uncertain. I mentioned this in my previous video too. It feels like we have a little bit of Trinity vibes with this kid being kidnapped and put in an isolated cell. Not sure where they're going to ultimately go with it, but interesting story there. And the other stuff, we know about it, or it's not something that we feel like we need to be shown because we already assume it happened. So that's overall my thoughts. Still hopeful for the direction of the show, but hoping we really pick up on new things and not just recap old stuff going forward. What are your guys' thoughts overall? Are you really enjoying some of the storylines? Are you enjoying the Harry stuff? Are you enjoying the kidnapper stuff? Are you enjoying Dexter kind of learning his ways as far as researching and putting people on his table? Curious on your thoughts there as far as pros or cons that you may personally have and just maybe things that you picked up on that I didn't mention here in this episode reviews. Thank you guys so much for watching and I hope to talk to you again soon.